So a lot of your questions had to do with where we stand with regard to our budget, both pre-COVID and during COVID. And I'm sure, as all of you know, who followed the Muni Reliability Working Group, who presented their recommendations to me really in my first month on the job, the fundamental finances of the SFMTA are broken. Back when Prop E created SFMTA back in 1999, the presumption was that we were setting up the SFMTA as a financially self-sufficient entity that would be funded largely from parking revenues and transit fares, plus a fixed general fund set aside. So those were our sources of revenue. And we had to do everything we're going to do within that budget. And I'm sure all of you know, because you're transit experts, municipal agencies can't borrow money for operations. If we run out of money, we don't make payroll, and we end up having to cut service and lay off riders. So it's very important for us to find some stability with our revenue, particularly given the vagaries of many of our revenue sources. The general fund goes up and down based upon business success and so on. So our task here is to create some stability in order to be able to deliver great service. But our financial model has changed substantially over time, with parking and transit fares steadily going down. Uber and Lyft have been eating at our parking revenue every year since they got started. And our transit fares, even though ridership has been up substantially over the last few years, our investment in equity programs has resulted in the value of transit fares declining over time, which has, frankly, broken the math of what makes the agency work. It makes us increasingly dependent upon general fund transfers. So, of course, COVID was by far the worst financial crisis we have ever experienced in the history of the agency. Our parking revenue and transit fare revenue collapsed completely. Parking has come back a bit, but it's still 30% lower than it was pre-COVID. And our transit revenues remain way down. They're about 84% lower than they were pre-COVID. Now, we're very fortunate that the federal government has been quite generous and has covered our direct COVID-related losses through this year. And if not for that, just 6 months ago, we were drawing up lists to lay off 1,200 workers. That was how bad our finances were, and there was no one that was coming to our rescue. And thank goodness for Stacey Abrams and the 2 Senate seats from Georgia, because otherwise things would be a lot worse than they were. But the challenge in San Francisco, unlike other agencies, particularly the suburban agencies that are not very dependent upon the fare box, that are more dependent upon sales tax, and whose ridership is largely people who have no choice other than taking transit. So the suburban operators will largely recover this year. Here in San Francisco, the city is a global outlier in terms of recovery of the key sources of money that allow us to operate the agency. You all know all this. We're tracking all of the economic data from the Comptroller's Office on a monthly basis, doing scenario planning to figure out how long do we in San Francisco need to make our 1 year of federal money last? And all signs point to we're not going to be at full recovery until 2025 at the earliest. So whether you look at office vacancy rates or how well people are reoccupying financial district office, San Francisco is the worst performing city in the world. And it's partly due to the unique nature of the downtown San Francisco economy. It's heavily information technology, professional services, finance, and other types of jobs that have been very, very susceptible to work from home. And so while transit ridership has almost fully recovered on weekends, not in the downtown, so much of our ridership is rooted in the financial district, which is still completely empty. Other key indicators of our riders, international tourism and business travel, way, way down. SFO, 30% of pre-pandemic. Moscone Center, empty, like very little in the way of bookings. And hotel recovery, again, worst in the United States. So from the controller's office, we're expecting recovery around 2025. So that is our challenge. Right now, we're needing to spread our one-time federal funding out in order to survive and not end up having to lay off our workers and dramatically cut service in 2023 or in 2024. And the trends are consistent across the agencies that are really dependent upon the downtown San Francisco financial district. So our challenge is figuring out how to calibrate our spending. We know that if we invest too slowly in transit service restoration, then we enter a kind of classic transit death spiral, where if we invest too slowly and don't deliver enough service, there's not enough transit available. It doesn't support the economic recovery of San Francisco. People stop riding, revenue declines, we cut service, even less transit is available. We basically end up killing the downtown San Francisco economy. And we end up in this usual transit death spiral, which all of us want to avoid. But the other scenario is equally as bad. If we invest our money too quickly, if we take our 1 year's worth of money and spend it all this year, service levels will go up and that would be great. And all of my riders would be happy and people would stop complaining about me and I would make the voters happier and probably make it easier to succeed in 2022. But if we don't win new revenue in 2022, our one-time funding runs out next year before ridership bounces back, and that results in catastrophic service cuts, which ends up in the usual transit death spiral, but in the other direction. So our task here is to find the Goldilocks approach, to stay just ahead of economic recovery, not spending our money too fast and not spending our money too slow, but spending it just right so that we can survive. And I should also add that for the next 6 months, revenue isn't the primary obstacle to service restoration, it is hiring. So many of our units, typically throughout the agency, we're operating at about a 15% vacancy rate. On the transit operations side, that is as high as 40%. We are hiring and training as quickly as we possibly can, particularly on the rail side, but our rail training is actually sending us back on the bus side because of course, all of our rail operators were bus operators a couple of months ago. So that's what we're racing to do right now, and is also the reason why we were unexpectedly able to include the M and the 31 Balboa in our August service restart, largely because our retirement rate was about half of normal during COVID, which was kind of expected because there's nothing to do. And so we were expecting this month to see a massive raft of retirements, which has not yet precipitated. So we ended up actually with far better than expected staffing as a result of a lack of retirements, but also greater success in the training program. So we were able, thanks to strong support from our labor unions, cut a lot of rules in order to be able to allocate some more staff to those two lines. So as we've been trying to deal with COVID, so as you know, back in April of a year and a half ago, we cut about 60% of the service in order to do 3 things. One is protect the health of our workforce and deal with the fact that a big chunk of our workforce was not present every day because we wanted to make sure that anyone with the sniffles was not coming to work. And so we rearranged all the service based upon our data in order to accommodate the social distancing, which had cut 3/4 of our capacity. And so we stripped the system back to its most essential lines, the lines that carried the most essential workers, focusing on the highest ridership routes and the neighborhoods in the Muni equity strategy. Since that April, we've been steadily bringing service back, focused on chasing the data about where the riders were, focusing on equity, and supporting San Francisco's economic recovery. So with the service changes we did a couple of months ago, and particularly the August service changes, our focus now is making sure that all San Franciscans are within 2 to 3 blocks of the Muni line, that we serve the schools, and that we balance our early investment in social equity with a new investment in geographic equity, making sure that all the neighborhoods are served. So this is the timeline. I think you guys know all of this, but now After the August service changes are in place, we start the major planning work for what do we do for our January service improvements, but more importantly, what is our vision for Muni as a whole? We stabilize, we believe, at about 85% of pre-COVID until we can get new outside revenue. So that's accounting for the massive structural deficit that we had before COVID, plus the sucker punch that COVID delivered to us, exacerbating all of those long-term trends that, again, were laid out very clearly in the Muni Reliability Working Group work that demonstrated that our basic financials are broken. So we're starting to work about, all right, what's the best that we can do with the resources that we have? And at the same time, were we to get new resources, what is the transit system that San Francisco needs in order to deal with the fact that the city has changed dramatically, which we've also discovered during COVID. It's been a long-term trend that the primary growth in ridership is not downtown San Francisco. It is where all the new jobs are being created, which is outside of the downtown and across the region. So Muni connects terribly to BART. It connects even worse to Caltrain. We are not well suited to connecting folks to the place where the massive amount of job growth is occurring, which is to the south, not in downtown. Similarly, we're finding that a lot of the travel in San Francisco is not neighborhood to downtown, but it's neighborhood to neighborhood. So how do we design a system that gets people across town to wherever they need to go in a way that is fast, frequent, and reliable, including accommodating transfers, something that Muni has always done terribly. So those are questions that we're going to be asking starting at the end of this month. We brought on a transit consultant, Jarrett Walker. Many of you probably know him. He will be doing the consultant part of that work that will include a significant amount of community engagement as we move forward into the end of the year. So again, our focus with the August service changes is filling in the pale pink areas on the map that are people that were beyond a quarter of a mile or about 3 blocks from a transit stop, so that at least 98% of San Franciscans are within a short walk of transit. And of course, continuing to supplement that with our essential trip card for those for whom that walk distance or topography makes that distance too far, while we continue to ask questions about to what degree do we, how do we deal with the tension between fast, frequent, and reliable service on fewer lines versus slower and less frequent service on more lines versus bringing in more money in order to do both. So these are all the lines that are coming back in August. This is a major service expansion. We're making a variety of tweaks, particularly in the Southwest, where we didn't have quite enough buses to restore all their lines to their previous configurations. But we wanted to at least provide some service, particularly for seniors, disabled people, and lower income folks in the Southwest and some of the hillier neighborhoods. Oops. So there we go. So those are the new lines that are coming back. And the work that we're doing now in this fall and winter, we'll be looking at a few different alternatives, including what if we did all of the previous lines, but at 85% of their pre-COVID headway? What if instead we focused on more service in the core and created a high frequency, high speed, high reliability network? And then also, what if there was a hybrid where we accounted for particularities where we need to have lines closer to populations of concern, like places where we have high concentrations of people with disabilities or people who are seniors. So our focus, of course, will be access. What is the network that creates the greatest opportunity for our residents, taking into account walking distance, headway, speed, and reliability? So the project will run from late July into November. and then we'll present some options to the MTA board, and we'll of course do outreach to make sure we get feedback from all of you. So a couple more words about the budget. I need to emphasize, despite what a lot of well-intentioned people have said, we do not have enough money to restore all of the Muni service, or doing so rather would be a completely unacceptable, irresponsible risk for our workforce. I care very much about the people who have gotten this agency through the pandemic, and I do not want to put their jobs at risk in order to have some people be happy in the short run. What instead I need is to make sure that there is a high likelihood of getting the revenue that we need in order to fill our structural gap. So you also, of course, asked some questions about the train control system. I think many of you know a lot about our antiquated, ancient train control system that dates back to 1998 and is still loaded on 5¼ inch floppy disks. It is the biggest source of delay in the system, aside from vehicle breakdown, which we are addressing. In fact, most of these numbers are from 2018. So our new train cars are vastly more reliable than the previous train cars. So right now, most of the problems that we're having in the rail system, particularly in the subway, are a result of the train control system. It famously has problems at the portals. And that is why back in April a year ago, we worked to try to simplify the subway. Both during COVID and particularly in order to accommodate the growth of San Francisco, we need to take advantage of the capacity of our subway system, which is designed to accommodate 4- and 5-car trains. And that means running longer trains in the subway, and it means simplifying things, particularly at West Portal and the Most Portal. Right now, or previously, it had been a mess. And while I remember back riding the trains in the 80s and the 90s, that the system was designed to accommodate coupling, that coupling system never really worked very well. And we've looked all around the world, including cities like Frankfurt, at entities that do coupling in revenue service. No one does it well. And in all cases, the variability in the time that it takes to couple is far greater than the time that it would take to just get off the train and transfer. So what we're wanting to do is to make sure that every train operating on the subway is a 2- or 3-car train. And yes, we are looking very carefully at 3-car trains for the MJUDA, including taking advantage of new technology. And we need a system that is reliable. And the experiments that we've been doing so far with the subway after we fixed the overhead wire problem are showing, unsurprisingly, that simplified operations in the portal makes the system vastly more reliable. And we'll be getting the headway up as soon as the M starts running in the subway in 3 weeks. So we are working, of course, on replacing the train control system. It's a long process and it is very expensive and it's really hard to get outside funding for it. Obviously, a modern train control system would improve the situation vastly. I will not get into the details of that, aside from the fact that it remains very high on our list of priorities in the capital improvement program. We are doing project development now and should go into preliminary engineering in 23. We are trying to position ourselves to be able to potentially accelerate all of this if the federal government does the right thing and comes through to help us fund that. So I think that tried to answer a whole lot of your questions. There was a lot of material really quick. Why don't I pause now and